So today we're on chapter 1, sections 4 and 5, and this is when we are dealing with positive and negative integers. Positive and negative, when you're adding and subtracting with signs that are different and the same, there's just a couple of rules to remember and a lot of practice needed to get really good at it. So first let's talk about adding and subtracting. So if you have two positive numbers, and let's just say we start at 1. We have a 1 plus 2. Well, if we're at 1 and we go into a positive direction 2 spots, that's the same as adding 2, puts us at 3. Okay? That one is easy. It's always easy to add the positives. But now let's look at this. Let's look at 3 minus 1. Now what you need to know is minus 1 is the exact same thing as plus negative 1. When you're subtracting, you're really adding a negative. So if you start at 3 and you go 1 to the negative direction from that puts you at 2. Alright, all that's easy peasy. You can add a negative, you can add two positives. Well, what about when you have a negative 2, and let's say you're adding 4 to it? So if I'm at negative 2, and that's my starting point, and I'm going to add 4, I'm going to go 1, 2, 3, 4 in the positive direction, and that's going to put me at 2. Now if I'm at a negative 3, and I'm going to subtract 4, remember, subtract is the same as adding a negative. So if I start at negative 3, and I'm going to add to it a negative 4, that means I'm going to go this way because that's negative. So 1, 2, 3, 4 puts me right there at negative 7. So two positives added together give you a bigger positive number. Two negatives added together just give you a smaller negative number, but the integer itself is getting larger. The absolute value is getting larger, but you're really getting smaller because negative 7 is a lot smaller than negative 3 or negative 4. So when you're combining negatives, you just get farther negative. But now let's take these two instances where the signs are different. So we had negative 2 plus 4 equals negative 2. And we had 3 minus 1, which is the same as negative 1, equals 2. Okay, so which one of these in the first example is bigger? The 4. I think I wrote that wrong. There we go. So since the 4 is biggest, the sign of the 4 is positive, therefore the sign of your answer is positive. And what's the difference between 4 and 2? 2. Alright, so let's look at the other example. Which one's bigger, 3 or 1? Ignore the signs for right now, just the number itself, the integer. 3 is bigger, so its sign is going to carry to the answer. And the difference between 3 and 1 is 2. So let me give you some examples of this. Let's say we have negative 28 plus 25. Which one of those is bigger? 28 is bigger, and its sign is negative, so that sign will be in our answer. What's 28 minus 25? What's the difference between 28 and 25? 3. That's your answer. You don't need a number line, you don't have to count spots, and you can do this without a calculator. So how about 15 minus 10? Well, minus 10 is the same as plus negative. What's bigger, 15 or 10? Definitely 15, so the sign of your answer will be the same as the 15, positive. What's the difference between 15 and 10? 5. So there's your answer. So if you have a negative, let's say 65, and you're going to you're going to add 32. Which one of those is bigger, 65 or 32? 65 is bigger, so the sign of the 65 carries to your answer. What's the difference between 65 and 32? That's 33. So your answer is negative 33. Well, now we get to the instance of when you're subtracting a negative. So let's look at number 8. Number 8 on 1, 4, and 1, 5 plus positive and negative integers says 2 minus negative 1. Alright, so if a 3 minus 1 was the same as 3 plus negative 1, in our last examples, anytime you have a minus, you're going to change it to positive and change the sign of the next answer. It works the same when you're subtracting negatives. So 2 minus negative 1 is the same as 2 plus positive 1. So that gives you a 3. Okay, so minus negative turns into plus positive. Another way I've heard that remembered is if you have two little negative signs, they will come together and form a positive because a plus sign is just made up with two dashes. So these two little symbols combine to be a plus sign. 2 minus negative 8 is the same as 2 plus positive 8, which is 10. That's just a rule that you have to remember. Okay, so when we get down to number 31, now we're talking about multiplication and division. So the easiest thing in multiplication and division is the little pizza guy. So there's his face, and he has two negatives and a positive. Okay, so let's say we have this we all know that positive 2 times positive 4 is positive 8. So I don't care about positives and positives. This is only when we're involving negatives. So let's say we have a negative 2 times a negative 3. Look over at your pizza guy. You've used a negative and a negative. What's left? Positive. So the final answer is positive 6. Let's say we have a negative 1 times a positive 4. Look to your little pizza guy. You've used a negative and a positive. The only sign that's left is negative. So your product will be negative 4. So how about a 3 times a negative 6? Well, look to your pizza guy. You used a positive and a negative. The only sign left is negative. So your final answer will be negative 18. And again, let's do a negative times a negative. How about negative 1 times negative 1? Look to your pizza guy. You've used a negative and a negative. So your product, the only sign it can be is positive because that's what's left. So that's positive 1. Now the actual mathematical rule says the product of a negative times a negative always comes out positive. And anytime those signs are different when you're multiplying, then the sign is negative. Those rules are hard to remember, but the pizza guy is always easy to draw, and you can draw him on any test you're taking, on your scratch paper and whatnot. Even if you divide, these rules are the same. So for instance, a negative 2 divided by negative 1 would be a negative and a negative, so you use those two. What's left? Positive. So 2 divided by 1 is 2, and the negative divided by negative turns positive. Well, how about a negative 8 divided by a positive 4? Those signs are different, so the quotient's negative, and that's 2. And this is really all you need to know about positive and negative integers, so good luck practicing that.